On September 1, 2018, a text message landed on Khalil Mack's phone. He was the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. He was 27 years old. He was the best pure pass rusher on planet Earth. And in that moment, he found out he was no longer an Oakland Raider. Not in a meeting room, not face-to-face with the coach who promised to keep him. Just a phone, a headline, and a franchise he had bled for turning its back on him in the time it takes to refresh a timeline. Just 2 years earlier, this same man had been the single biggest reason the Raiders were even relevant again. He was the engine behind their first playoff berth in over a decade. Fans wore his jersey. Kids in Oakland grew up wanting to hit like him. And now, without ever sitting across a table and truly working it out, the franchise decided he was expendable. This is the story of how the Raiders built their entire identity around one man, then traded him away for future draft assets while he was still sitting at the absolute peak of his powers. This is the story of Khalil Mack and the day Oakland chose picks over its own legend. Before he was terrorizing quarterbacks in silver and black, Khalil Mack was just a kid in Fort Pierce, Florida, who got called soft. His cousin said it during a backyard drill when Mack was 11 years old. It stuck. Mack has said he never forgot that word, and he spent the rest of his childhood trying to prove it wrong. Here's what almost nobody remembers. Khalil Mack was not a hyped recruit. He wasn't ranked. Big programs didn't call. Coaches from the major conferences looked right past him, the way they look past hundreds of kids every single year who never get a second glance. Only a couple of schools even offered him a scholarship, and one of them was the University at Buffalo, a program that had almost never produced an NFL star, tucked away in the cold, far from the spotlight of college football's biggest stages. Mack has said he believes it was fate that sent him there. Whatever it was, Buffalo got the steal of a lifetime. He arrived as an afterthought and left as the greatest player the school had ever seen. Teammates would later describe him as almost superhuman, a guy who could physically toss grown men around like they weighed nothing. By his senior year, Mack had rewritten the record books. He set the all-time NCAA record for career forced fumbles. He tied the record for tackles for loss. And in one signature performance against Ohio State, a team that entered the game undefeated and ranked in the top 5 nationally, Mack put up 2.5 sacks and returned an interception for a touchdown, almost single-handedly humiliating one of the best rosters in the country. That one game changed everything. Scouts who had never heard his name suddenly couldn't stop talking about him. He climbed draft boards every single week, from an afterthought to a possible top 5 pick, all without playing a single down in a major conference, without a 5-star recruiting rating, without any of the advantages that usually build a first-round pick. He simply outworked and outplayed everyone standing in front of him until the entire league had no choice but to notice. On draft night in 2014, the Oakland Raiders had the 5th overall pick. They took Khalil Mack. A few rounds later, with pick number 36, they added a quarterback out of Fresno State named Derek Carr. Nobody could have known it yet, but the Raiders had just drafted the 2 cornerstones who would drag their franchise out of a decade of darkness. Mack's rookie season was solid, nothing more. For sacks, a guy still learning the speed of the league, still adjusting to blockers who were faster and smarter than anything he saw in college. But in year 2, something clicked, and it clicked in terrifying fashion. Mack exploded for 15 sacks in 2015, tied for second most in the entire NFL, trailing only J.J. Watt. Quarterbacks started game planning around him specifically, sliding protection his way, chipping him with running backs, and it barely slowed him down. He did something no player in league history had ever done before. He was named a first-team All-Pro at 2 completely different positions in the same season, defensive end and outside linebacker, because he was too versatile, too disruptive, and too dangerous to be limited to just one job description. Then came 2016, the year Khalil Mack stopped being a rising star and became the most feared defender in football. The Raiders were finally good again. Really good. Derek Carr was playing like an MVP candidate. The offensive line was one of the best in football. And on defense, Mack was a wrecking ball, even on a unit that ranked near the bottom of the league in almost every other category. He racked up a sack in 8 straight games, tying an NFL record. He finished the year with 11 sacks, 73 tackles, 5 forced fumbles, and a pick 6. He was directly responsible for nearly half of Oakland's total sacks as a team. Take him off that roster and the entire defense collapses. That's not an opinion. That's just math. The Raiders went 12-4. They made the playoffs for the first time in 14 years, ending one of the longest postseason droughts in the entire league. Then heartbreak hit. Derek Carr broke his leg in the final weeks of the season, and Oakland was forced into the playoffs with a backup quarterback who had barely played all year. They lost in the wild card round. A quiet, painful exit for a team that had looked like a real contender just weeks earlier. Mack refused to make excuses. He stood in front of reporters after that loss and put the blame squarely on the defense, on himself, for not doing enough to carry a team that desperately needed him to. Weeks later, at the NFL honors ceremony the night before the Super Bowl, Khalil Mack's name was called as the Associated Press Defensive Player of the Year. He beat out Von Miller by a single vote out of 50 media members casting ballots. He became just the second player in Raiders history to win the award, joining a Hall of Fame cornerback from an era Mack's own parents barely remembered. For one golden season, Khalil Mack was the engine of an Oakland renaissance. Fans finally believed the losing was over. The Raiders finally had a face of the franchise, a homegrown superstar wearing silver and black, exactly the kind of player you build a decade around. Then, everything started to unravel. In January of 2018, the Raiders made a stunning move. They handed Jon Gruden a 10-year contract worth a reported $100 million to return to coaching after nearly a decade in the broadcast booth. Raider Nation was thrilled. Gruden had coached the franchise before, he understood the culture, and fans genuinely believed his return would restore the swagger of old Raiders football. He was brought back to finish what McKenzie had started, to take a young, talented roster and turn it into a real championship contender. But there was a problem nobody wanted to say out loud in all the celebration. Jon Gruden and Khalil Mack, the two most important figures in the entire organization, the new head coach and the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, had barely spoken. Reports surfaced that Gruden hadn't had a real conversation with his best player since the day he was hired. Think about that. The head coach and the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, two men whose success was completely tied together, were essentially strangers. Mack's rookie contract was expiring. He was set to make just under $14 million in 2018 on a fifth-year option, a number that was way below his actual value on the open market. Aaron Donald, a defender in the same tier as Mack, had just signed a record-breaking extension with the Rams. That contract became the new benchmark, and Mack's camp wanted a deal that reflected it. The Raiders had a different philosophy. General manager Reggie McKenzie was known around the league for one hard rule. He did not negotiate with players who held out. Ever. It didn't matter who you were or what you'd already accomplished. If you weren't in the building, you weren't getting a new deal at the table. It was a stance that had worked before with other players. It was about to blow up in the biggest way possible. When training camp opened in July of 2018, Khalil Mack didn't show up. He skipped the voluntary off-season program. He skipped mandatory minicamp. And now he was skipping camp entirely, risking fines that would eventually cost him millions of dollars. All because he believed the team he had given everything to wasn't willing to pay him what he was worth. He wasn't alone in that fight. Across the league that same summer, other elite defenders, players like Aaron Donald and Earl Thomas, were locked in nearly identical standoffs with their own teams, all of them trying to force a new market rate for truly elite defensive talent. But Mack's holdout carried extra weight, because the man on the other side of the negotiating table barely knew him. Gruden stood in front of Raiders fans that same month and made a promise. He told the crowd they were going to find a way to bring Khalil Mack back. It sounded like reassurance. It sounded like a coach standing behind his star. 6 weeks later, that promise would be broken in the most public way imaginable. Negotiations stalled completely. According to McKenzie, the Raiders had made an offer back in March, months before camp even opened. But the gap between what Oakland was willing to pay and what Mack's side was asking for never closed. Weeks turned into a full holdout. The regular season opener was closing in fast, a Monday night showcase against the Rams, the exact kind of stage where a superstar pass rusher makes his presence felt. Except the Raiders had a growing fear. Mack wasn't walking through that door anytime soon. So on September 1st, 2018, just 5 days before that season-opening kickoff, the Raiders made their move. But it wasn't the move anyone in Oakland expected. They didn't franchise tag him. They didn't force him onto the field under his existing contract and figure it out later. They picked up the phone and called the Chicago Bears. The deal that followed became one of the most jaw-dropping trades in modern NFL history. Khalil Mack, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, a 3-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time first-team All-Pro, 27 years old and squarely in his athletic prime, was headed to Chicago. In return, the Raiders received the Bears' first-round picks in 2019 and 2020, a 2019 6th-round pick, and a 2020 3rd-round pick. Going back to Chicago, the Bears also received a 2020 2nd-round pick and a conditional 5th-rounder from Oakland. It was, by nearly every measure, the most expensive trade package ever assembled for a single defensive player. Hours after the trade was finalized, the Bears signed Mack to a 6-year extension worth $141 million, $90 million of it guaranteed. Overnight, he became the highest-paid defensive player in the history of the sport. The reaction inside the Raiders' locker room was immediate and raw. Derek Carr, the quarterback drafted alongside Mack back in 2014, the same year, the same rebuild, posted his feelings within minutes, writing simply, "This is the sucky part of this business." Defensive end Bruce Irvin echoed the shock, calling it stunning and telling fans it was time to move forward. These weren't cold, corporate statements. These were teammates who had shared a locker room with Mack for 4 years, blindsided by a decision that came from above their heads. Owners and executives around the league were stunned too, and not just by the fact that Mack got traded, but by how the deal itself was structured. Multiple teams had been calling Oakland for days trying to make an offer, including the New York Jets, who were reportedly deep in talks right up until Chicago won the bidding. Reggie McKenzie later admitted that more than half the league had reached out about Mack once word got around that a trade might actually happen. Some league executives openly questioned why the Raiders even agreed to send back that extra 2nd-round pick swap in the deal, when they clearly held all the leverage and the Bears were desperate enough to pay almost anything just to land him. One anonymous executive framed it bluntly. If Oakland was already willing to trade away 2 future first-round picks, there was no chance they were going to let the whole deal collapse over 1 extra swap. It made the return, as massive as it looked on paper, feel like it could have been even bigger. Jon Gruden tried to control the story in the days that followed. He insisted the decision was made together by himself, by McKenzie, by owner Mark Davis, and by the front office as a whole. He pushed back hard against any suggestion that he personally forced Mack out. But then, in an interview just over a week later, Gruden said something that told a very different story. He said Mack obviously didn't want to be there. It was a quiet admission that the relationship between coach and star had completely broken down, and that the front office had simply decided it was easier to cash in than to repair it. What happened next made the trade sting even worse for Raider Nation. Khalil Mack didn't need a single game to adjust to his new team. He didn't even need a full week of practice. In his very first outing with the Chicago Bears, on national television no less, he recorded a sack, forced a fumble, and picked off a pass, an electric 3-phase debut that instantly validated everything Chicago had gambled on him becoming. He finished that 2018 season with 12.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, and 6 forced fumbles, tying a career high. The Bears finished 12-4, won the NFC North for the first time in years, and made the playoffs. Mack was named a Pro Bowler again, this time in a different uniform, doing exactly what he had always done just days after leaving Oakland, except now it was Chicago fans chanting his name. Meanwhile, back in Oakland, the defense that had already been vulnerable with Mack on the field completely fell apart without him. The Raiders finished the 2018 season 4-12, one of the worst records in football. Barely 2 months after the trade, the Raiders also shipped away star wide receiver Amari Cooper, another homegrown building block, this time to the Dallas Cowboys for a first-round pick. The core that had been built to compete for a championship was being dismantled piece by piece, sold off for future draft capital while the present burned to the ground. Then, in December of 2018, less than 4 months after the Mack trade, the Raiders fired Reggie McKenzie, the very general manager who had drafted Mack, drafted Carr, drafted Cooper, and built the roster that finally brought Oakland back to relevance. He had been named the league's executive of the year less than 2 years earlier. Now he was gone too. Another piece of the old era swept away as Gruden consolidated total control over football operations. By the time the dust settled, almost nothing remained of the roster McKenzie had built. Fewer than 10 players he had drafted were still on the active roster. A franchise that once had 2 homegrown superstars anchoring both sides of the ball now had neither. The team that made the playoffs in 2016 on the strength of Khalil Mack's brilliance had, in less than 2 years, traded away its identity for a stack of future picks and a promise that a new era would somehow be better. So was it really betrayal, or was it just business? That question still divides Raiders fans to this day. Gruden and the front office will tell you it was a financial decision, forced by a holdout the team refused to reward. They'll tell you the return, for total draft picks including 2 first-rounders, gave the franchise a foundation to rebuild around. And in fairness, some of those picks did eventually become real contributors down the line. But ask anyone who watched Khalil Mack drag that franchise out of irrelevance with his bare hands, and they'll tell you a completely different story. They'll tell you a coach stood in front of the fan base and personally promised to bring their best player back, then traded him away weeks later without ever building a real relationship with him first. They'll tell you a front office let its most electric homegrown talent walk out the door in his athletic prime, right as he was entering the best years of his career, not because he wasn't worth the money, but because paying him meant breaking a rule about holdouts. They'll point out that the Raiders found a way to pay other holdouts before, that the rule wasn't as unbreakable as it was made out to be, and that somewhere along the way the front office simply decided Mack wasn't worth the exception. They'll tell you that loyalty in professional football only ever seems to run in one direction, and it isn't toward the player who bled for the uniform. And maybe the hardest part of all is that both sides were right, and it still ended in heartbreak. The picks were real. The return was historic. But so was the player they gave up to get it, and no draft pick, however valuable on paper, ever sells jerseys, wins a Defensive Player of the Year award, or makes a losing franchise believe in itself again the way Khalil Mack did. Khalil Mack went on to make more Pro Bowls in Chicago, cementing himself as one of the most complete edge rushers of his generation. He later moved on to the Los Angeles Chargers in 2022, reunited with a coach who had worked with him years earlier, and kept right on wrecking backfields, still racking up double-digit sack seasons well into his 30s, a testament to just how special his game truly was and how far ahead of the curve those Bears executives had been. The Raiders, meanwhile, relocated from Oakland to Las Vegas in 2020, chasing a fresh start in a brand new city, a new stadium, and a new identity. But through every rebuild, every new coach, and every new draft class since, they have never quite found another defender who could fully replace what they gave away on that Saturday in September. Some trades are just transactions, forgotten within a season or two. This one was a fracture, the kind that never fully heals. It split a fan base down the middle, ended a general manager's career just months later, and sent the best defensive player this franchise had developed in decades to go build the rest of his legacy somewhere else, wearing somebody else's colors, chasing rings that could have been chased in silver and black. And somewhere in Oakland, there are still fans who wonder what could have been, if the Raiders had just found a way to keep him home. What do you think? Was trading Khalil Mack a smart business decision, or the biggest betrayal in Raiders history? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you love deep dives into NFL history like this one, subscribe, because there are a lot more stories like this one still to tell.